Horses using tools? Yes, and it's groundbreaking. In this episode, Kate Farmer is my guest. She is an equine behaviorist and co-author of a study on tool use in horses she conducted with Professor Konstanze Krüger. What actually does it mean when horses deliberately use objects to achieve goals? What cognitive abilities are required, and how does this reshape our understanding of horses? Kate and I are diving deep into this topic about research and training and effort and what goes along with it if we are understanding the horse like this. It's time to rethink what we believe we know, and it's time to change the narrative about horses. Welcome to this week's episode of Horsefriends. I'm your guest, Celina Skogan, and I'm inviting everyone who takes horses seriously and doesn't underestimate their intelligence for this week's episode. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Horsefriends. I'm Celina Skogan, and today's episode is something special. Today we are diving into something long considered impossible, and that is horses using tools. My guest today is Kate Farmer, independent equine behavior researcher and author, and co-host of the Equine Science Talk International, a fantastic YouTube channel that I'm linking you in the show notes and that you should definitely check out. She's also co-host of a very exciting study about tool use in horses. And today we'll explore what tool use actually is, why it's a real game changer in animal cognition research, and what it means for our everyday life with horses. Welcome, Kate.
Hi there, Celina. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you for being back on the podcast. We also had this fantastic podcast with you, Konstanze and Isabel, about laterality. And I'm grateful that you're back again here today.
Thank you.
Let's dive in directly and take a deep dive into tool use, because I think this is so exciting that there's actually a systematic study in horses about this behavior. Let's start with just that we are having a little bit of structure, because not everybody is as nerdy as me and has a background there. So I would like to ask you can you give me a definition? What is tool use at all?
Well, you might regret asking me that, because the official definition is absolutely, I'll read it to you. It is, see what you think. Mm-hmm. Tool use is the external employment of an unattached environmental object to alter more efficiently the form, position, or condition of another object, another organism, or the user itself, when the user holds or carries the tool during or just prior to use and is responsible for the proper and effective orientation of the tool. Does that help? Not really, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so the simple version is using something that is not a part of the environment and is not a part of the horse's body to influence something else. So let's say, for example, a horse is using an automatic drinker. Mm-hmm. That is attached to the wall, and although it has to understand that you push the pedal or the lever, whatever it is, to get the water to come, it's part of the environment, it's fixed. So that's not tool use. However, if the horse picks up a stick and scratches its belly with it, that is tool use. It's something that's not part of the horse, that it has found and sourced, and it's applied it to do something for its own benefit. In general terms, as we go on, we'll talk about there are lots of very grey areas, and there isn't really, that definition is the one that is used in scientific papers, but the more I go into this topic, the more actually even that is a nonsense, because it's very much open to interpretation. There are some things you see and think, oh, that is tool use, and some things you think, well, not really, but it does still fit that definition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then we are already at my second question, because how can we distinct from play and random behavior and say, this is an accident, this is random behavior, and this is really targeted tool use?
This is such an interesting area, isn't it? Play, I think play can probably be the starting point for it, mm-hmm. because I suspect that some of the tool use we see, particularly in relation to foraging, horses getting food for themselves, actually starts by accident. They're playing with a stick or something like that, and they find that that scrapes things around. And hey, look, I can use this to scrape this bit of hay over here. And oh, I get that, and my neighbor doesn't. And then it becomes a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Distinguishing it from random behavior is actually easier because is it repeated? And is the behavior consistently repeated? And then you can say, well, it's not just random, it's something that this horse is clearly doing on a regular basis. So that one's a little bit easier to distinguish. Actually, drawing the line from when it stops being play and when it starts being tool use is a little bit more tricky.
Yeah, I see. This is a behavior we did not originally assign to horses. We know more or less, or that was something in my preparation to this podcast. I read, of course, also the definition of not podcast. I read the definition of tool use, and that it was originally the idea that this is what makes humans special, that we are able to use tools and that no other animal in the kingdom is capable of doing it. But by today, we know that's not true. We know that crows and chimpanzees and dolphins and now also horses are actually capable of using tools.
Elephants use tools as well. Ants use tools. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. Elephants I was aware of. Yeah, but ants I did. Yeah.
Ants use leaves to carry water.
Nah. Impressive.
Yeah. If the nest is in a place where there isn't direct access to water, they'll use a leaf from the tree, collect water in that, and carry the leaf to the nest.
Wow.
Yeah. Which actually comes to the point that I think we're addressing here, which is why do we see it in some animals and we don't appear to see it in others? And I think part of this, I mean, primates have a big advantage when it comes to tool use, and it's on the end of your arms, it's your hands. They have the right equipment for it. So in a way, it's perhaps to be expected that they'd be much more likely to do that. When we look at, for example, birds build nests. So they already have a sense, an instinctive sense of taking something from here to there and doing something with it. So that they can then extend that into tool use is maybe, it's a fairly logical path. Dolphins, I believe, if I'm thinking of the right study, use it for protection. Using collect sponges for protection.
For protection, I also think for play.
And for play, yes, yes, absolutely. But when it comes to horses, and with all of those examples we're talking about, you can actually see that the animal has a need that it's fulfilling. And the tool use actually helps fulfill that need where they wouldn't otherwise necessarily be able to do it. If we think of the chimpanzees, they use sticks to collect insects and get things out of holes and that sort of thing. That would be very difficult for them to do otherwise. Horses are on four legs. They've got four hooves. They haven't got hands. The only thing they can really manipulate things with is their teeth. And what does a horse need to use tools for? It eats grass. It doesn't really have a direct, obvious need where you'd say it will necessarily get this benefit. So my hunch is that we do see examples of tool use in horses, but we don't always recognize it. And that we don't see all that many because they simply don't have the need. If they were in an environment where they did, maybe we would see it much more often. And we do see, with the examples that we saw of tool use in the study, the majority of the time it was to do with fulfilling a basic need. So it was to do with food, it was to do with social interaction, it was to do with movement, getting into free space, this sort of thing. It had a direct connection to the basic needs. So if the basic needs are fulfilled, what does it need tools for? So it may actually be more down to the type of the species rather than the intelligence level. Horses are intelligent in their own way, so are dogs, so are birds, so are chimpanzees. maybe the need isn't really there, and maybe it isn't necessarily a good measure of intelligence of the species, because it depends on how appropriate tool use is to that particular animal is a possibility.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting point. In our environment, I don't see my horses using tools at all, but they also don't have a need to fulfill. Maybe we can count opening doors, but they are opening their doors. They get push doors to the Utmark, so where they can go
Yeah.
have free access to the inside and outside.
And the
But
door is
otherwise,
fixed, so it doesn't actually meet the definition. But I say I'm a little bit, jury is out on that definition. We have a wonderful example at our ranch of one horse who's a real smarty pants, and we have an automatic hay feeder. And the gate goes up at one end, the horse goes in, the transponder on the horse's neck connects with the computer, goes beep, and the door to the hay opens. When the horse has had its ration, the door closes again and the horse goes out and the next horse comes in. But Miss Smarty Pants worked out that if she didn't completely leave the hay feeder, she could leave her bottom holding the door open, the exit door open. So the next horse comes in, its transporter activates the feeder. She then backs up and pushes it out again and she gets his portion. And we worked really hard to discourage it. There is no way that was a trained behavior. We did not want this to happen.
Really, that's
But
funny.
she did it. So when you think of what she's actually gone through to do that, because after the beep goes, you've only got a short amount of time before the door opens at the back. So she's associated the beep with the fact that the door is going to close. And when the door closes, the hay opens. She's got a fairly narrow window in there to respond to this. And she did it. And she obviously worked it out. But after she worked it out, we saw others that I would say are not quite as overall smart doing the same behavior.
So they were copying.
They were copying what she was doing and getting the same benefit.
Interesting. That is impressive. They were in another important topic, that's eavesdropping.
Yes,
We have to speak
absolutely.
about that too.
How long have you got?
We have to another time.
Another time we'll talk about that one. Yeah.
Exactly. So today we are focusing on your study about tool use.
Yeah.
Because the study that you did there with Konstanze and a few other colleagues was significant because it was the first time that this ability was scientifically described in horses, and it's a real milestone when we are looking at equine cognition. Just let's talk a little bit about the study itself, only because I want to come to the part where we can discuss your examples. I got a few examples and a few videos from you, and they are also cool. So how was the setup? What was the methodology defining also true tool use and data collection and everything around there? Just a little bit nerdy background.
Well, I must make a little confession at this point. It sort of happened by accident because we set out to look for innovative behavior. We weren't even really thinking about tool use at this point.
Okay, before you canter along, what is innovative behavior?
Sorry, yes, so creative behavior, the horse finding solutions to a particular thing, showing unusual behavior with a particular end in mind. So, for example, there was an experiment that one of Konstanze's PhD students set up where horses had to learn to turn a spindle to open a feeder to get the feed out. And they weren't given any instructions. They were just put in the box with this and they worked out what they had to do. And from that, she could see which ones did that and which ones didn't. So which ones could learn by just fiddling around with it and eventually finding it and saying, oh, yes. So that's innovative behavior. And tool use is sort of a subsection of that. Because the innovative behavior we looked at by putting out a call on a website, on social media, all over the place, asking people to send in examples of unusual behavior in their horses. And we left the definition of that fairly vague because we didn't know what was going to come in. We thought, well, get all the examples and then decide how we're going to carve these up. And we got something over 1,000 responses, of which there were about 750, I think it's just over 750 examples of some sort of innovative behavior. that was spontaneous, so it hadn't been
Hmm.
trained. And within those, there was this little group that appeared to be tool use.
Hmm.
And there were 20 that came into this category, and they were then shown to a panel of experts who decided whether they really did qualify as tool use or not. And in making that decision, they partly used the description that I just gave you, which I'm certainly not going to repeat, but basically,
Thank
you
you.
think about a person using a tool,
Yeah.
it's something that isn't part of you when you're using it to do
Hmm.
something else. Um, and they whittled those then down to 13. And of those 13, they fell into four categories, which were foraging, which was the majority of them. Seven of these 13 were about foraging, so
Hmm.
getting hay, getting feed. Four of them were social interaction. One of them was put down as being escape, but personally, I'm not 100% convinced by that one.
Hmm.
And one of them was about comfort. So, as we were mentioning earlier, we can very clearly see where the need is. Foraging is really important for a horse, and that's where the majority of the cases came. So, having isolated those cases, we then started looking at exactly what the horses were doing and why they were doing it. So that's kind of where it started from. So normally, for those not involved in the scientific environment, usually you'd start off with some kind of premise and some kind of experimental aim.
Hmm.
But in this case, it sort of emerged out of a different study that we found these things and thought, oh my goodness, that's interesting. Let's have a look at those.
Let's have a look at that. And then you
Yeah.
found a few because you also have videotaped quite some examples. I was very impressed by that.
Yes, people sent in the videos. They were their own videos of their own horses. So I mean, this was crowdsourcing. So there is a certain caveat to that in that you can't really guarantee whether there was any training involved. In a few cases, very clearly there was, but
Hmm.
you can't be absolutely sure. And you don't really know to what extent people like to think their horse is clever. So maybe they're unintentionally encouraging a particular kind of behavior. You don't really know whether it's spontaneous from the horse, but let's put that on the side because some of these behaviors are very rare anyway. So if you don't crowdsource it, where are you going to get it from?
Yeah.
Certainly, the examples we came up with were convincing, except as I say, apart from this one that I wasn't personally, I wasn't 100% convinced. The experts were, so that's just maybe I'm crazy. I go along with that.
And then it still makes a lot of sense for me if a horse is using a stick to reach food, especially if they're a little bit hungry. So there, I would say it's a shortcut. Of course, it makes sense. But you also were spectating there a few, yeah, more behaviors that are expecting more cognition, and I was so impressed by a foal brushing her. Wasn't it what brushing the mother?
It was brushing the mother. And like you, I find this one absolutely fascinating
Stunning.
because there was one example that was very, very clear comfort use. The horse was scratching its own belly with a stick. It picked up a sort of long stick
Mhm.
thing and it scratched its belly. In the foal one, the foal picks up a brush, could be a curry comb, something like that, and it's actually emulating human grooming behavior and brushing the mare. And what I find from the cognitive point of view about that is just mind blowing is the foal doesn't get the benefit, the mare
Yeah.
does. So why does it do it? And why does it use its social interaction? Certainly, but a horse would do that with its teeth. Horses do scratch each
Yeah.
other with their teeth all the time. That is not unusual behavior. That's absolutely common behavior. But this particular horse foal rather, was using a brush. I don't really know what to make of that one, I must say, other than it is absolutely mind blowing what was going through that foal's mind. And does it suggest that that foal then has a sense that it's doing something nice for the mother in the same way that a human was? So, had it observed that the mare enjoyed it when the person did that, and it was then copying that behavior to get the same effect? Possible? I don't know.
Wow. That's really, really amazing. And just inside sentences, you have been naming here a lot of cognitive requirements that a horse actually needs for showing behavior like this. And I think this was one of the things that was so outstanding for me when I got familiar with the study, because I thought, okay, if horses are capable of this amount of cognition, that is changing, that must change also our perspective on horses, because historically we have not exactly perceived horses as problem solvers, right?
Well, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Traditionally, no.
no.
I would say we're getting closer and closer to
Mm-hmm.
that because when we start looking at innovative behavior, we're getting very close.
Mm-hmm.
The cognitive requirements for tool use, yes, we have certain things that are there. We have goal orientation, we have problem solving. Um, Object permanence, maybe, yeah. But I think the main thing is that the horse has to see that it can manipulate something and then it's going to get a benefit. So there's like a middle stage. And you can dress that up in different words, but actually that's the crucial thing. Does it get the connection between what it
Yeah,
does with this external object and the effect that that then has on something else?
yeah,
And that is kind of at the crux of tool use. Now, again, as I mentioned earlier, it is kind of a grey area because, as I said, using a drinker doesn't qualify as tool use. But the horse still has to get the connection between if I push my nose on this button, the water's going to come out. Does it matter whether that button is attached to the wall or not? I don't know. There's been a great example going around on social media of a horse scratching itself with a rope that's got knots in. And it picks up the rope in its mouth, chucks it over its head, and runs all the way down its back, particularly on the withers and the hips. Now, the withers and the hips have been shown to be particularly good areas for scratching because that lowers the heart rate. So it's a relaxation thing. But is that tool use or not? The tool, yeah, it looks like tool use. It's using something external to itself, but it's hanging on the wall. So it could also be argued that that's not tool use. So what I'm saying is that tool use isn't really a clear cut thing. There's a lot of grey areas in there, and I think it's the way the horse reasons is probably more interesting. The fact that it is using or is capable of using tools is more the point than what it actually means in defining its cognitive ability. Because what do we really mean by cognitive ability? I mean, let's say we mean intelligence, and intelligence is often defined as using logic, reasoning, problem solving, and planning. Well, that doesn't necessarily require you to use a tool. You can solve a problem without having to use a tool to do it. Can it be trained behavior? Generally, we say no. But how many people do you know who can use a tool without being shown how to do it?
No, none. I
Exactly.
don't think so, none.
Exactly. So maybe that isn't really the point. Maybe trained behavior could be included under some circumstances. I mean, it would mean that the horse wasn't necessarily making the same connections, but it's certainly making very intelligent ones. So yeah, it's a bit of a grey area.
Yeah, now you got me thinking. So now I would prefer to lean back for half an hour and process that and then continue. Continue later on, because in children, just I've done my homework, because in children we see them beginning using tools around 18 to 24 months.
Mhm.
And they usually also need someone. I've just been now reflecting on my own daughter, how she was doing it. So what she was doing very early was kind of using a stick for getting stuff out of under the sofa when she was playing and things. But of course, she saw me or Papa doing it first, right? And then she's
Yeah.
of course copying and seeing the benefit for her. But still, it shows how complex communication and how complex equine intelligence actually
Oh,
is.
Absolutely, much more than most people realize, I think. And I think that now that we've done this particular study, it opens the door for a lot more detailed research on this. Because my hunch is we're going to find a whole load more examples, and it's a lot more common than we think. It's just we don't recognize it as such. I suspect there are a whole load of horses out there that use sticks to drag the hay around, and either we don't see them doing it, or people just think, oh, he's just doing his crazy thing again, and don't think there's anything special in it. I suspect there is going to be an awful lot more of it out there, and it's just going to take an awful lot more research to find out exactly how common it is and in what areas it's used.
I've seen one of my horses picking up a whip when we have been, we have the riding arena in the center of the field. So the ponies have free access to it if I'm not locking them out. And if I've been working with one, I'm often dropping the whip on the sand, and then can happen that Vilja is coming and picking it up with his mouth and touching my butt. So I've always saw that as a funny trait. But of course, if I'm putting it in this context, he might be copying my behavior that he sees from collection or doing with other horses.
It's tool use,
It's tool use, yes.
isn't it? I mean, he may have seen you doing it, but he's
Yeah,
applying it in the same way he's seen you apply it.
yes.
So yes, I would say that is tool use in as much as pretty much any of the examples are. He's still got to make the connection, pick this up and do it. There was an example in the all videos that were sent in
Yeah.
of a horse that was eating from, there was one horse eating from a green bucket, and the other horse had a black bucket. And the green bucket horse had control of the situation. It was obviously higher ranking. And the one with the black bucket tried to use the bucket to make the one with the green bucket move away. And it didn't succeed, it didn't succeed, it didn't succeed. And then it picked it up high and waved it above the other horse's head, and the other horse backed off. And what do horses do when they're fighting? Particularly males, they get up high, they get up above their eye level, and the one that gets up there highest and first is, you might say, the winner, and the other one backs off. What do we do when we want to make space with a horse and it's getting too close to us? We get big.
Yes.
And you might just lift your hands up, or you might use a stick or a flag or something, but you get big and the horse backs away. So here we had an example of a horse actually applying that, again, using a human tool. So in a way, maybe similar to the way that the foal did, it was using the feed bucket because it wasn't effective just by using its own nose and using its own posture. So, all right, I'm taking the bucket to this one.
If horses are reaching for tools and applying it in these ways, we need to rethink our mental categories. We do.
Yes, I think
We
that's
do.
entirely possible. It's a very, philosophically, it's actually a very interesting area because the more we understand about equine cognition and the way the horse sees the world and the way the horse feels about the world, the more it highlights how we need to respect that. And some people are willing to accept that, and some people aren't. Some people like to think of the horse as a signal in, signal out. Get it to do this, give it a cookie, you've trained it. And they don't take into account the wider cognitive landscape. I think, I'm hoping the time will come when that whole cognitive landscape becomes part of everybody's perception of the horse. But it's a bit of an uphill climb because some people don't really want to accept that responsibility for understanding what the horse is communicating, even when it's communicating something you probably don't want to hear.
Because it brings a lot of responsibility.
It does.
Right?
It does.
Yeah. Changing the narrative completely.
Yeah, completely.
And even this, what you were meaning, what you were mentioning there, this teaching a cue by giving a cookie was already in advance to looking at the horse from a perspective of dominating it. And then learning theory was entering the stage. And now we are coming to an area where we can better and better understand equine cognition. And I think it's so fascinating because it's really it's a different narrative and it's so wow.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And
So
discovering tool use is kind of one step. It's one piece of the
one
puzzle,
piece of,
but it isn't. It certainly isn't the whole thing. There's a lot more that we need to find out.
yeah, but it's opening doors, and that is what I always think it's so fantastic. So then I have a question for you because when horses can use tools like this, do we also have to change the narrative of that horses can plan? Can horses plan and act intentionally?
Well, tool use would suggest that they can.
Exactly. So
I mean, that
it's
comes as no surprise to me.
no, it's just, we always have
Yes,
this
exactly.
discussion,
Yes,
and
yes.
Frauke is always saying she's
Mm,
pretty sure there is a prefrontal cortex. We just haven't found it yet.
yeah.
But behavior is indicating it, and still we are also saying horses don't come with bad intention. So how can we, from all these puzzle pieces, when we are aware of this piece and this piece of behavior, how does it fit into the puzzle? What do you think? Difficult one,
It's
isn't
a
it?
very big question, yes.
Yeah.
I think there is just so much more that we need to learn. At the moment, we're collecting the pieces, and it's a bit like your jigsaw puzzle when you first get it out of the box. You've got a bit of this and a bit of that. No, this one's got a straight edge, so that's going to be round the side.
Mm,
And we haven't even really built the frame yet, let alone fill in the bits in the middle. Um, every piece we find is interesting in itself, but its context in the larger picture is not really very clear yet. I think because we've made massive advances, and horses, and I think other animals, I mean, I specialize in horses, so I can't speak for
mhm,
all the others,
mhm,
but they are way more sensitive than we give them credit for. They
mm,
can respond to much lighter and finer signals than we give them credit for. And I still see people thinking they've got to use a whole lot of force to get the
mm,
horse to do something. If that problem is set up correctly and the horse sees the benefit in doing that, and that's not necessarily a cookie, it can be its own
mhm,
comfort, it can be just the feeling of companionship with the person. You quite often see this. They just like hanging, some horses just like hanging out with people, the same as they like hanging out with
mhm,
other horses.
mhm,
If we can tap into this, we can be so much more subtle and so much more refined in our training, in our relationship with the horses, in the Umgang, as we say in German.
yeah.
Um, and that is something that I hope everybody is wanting to get towards. But it is, I don't think we'll ever reach the final. If we do it, we're looking hundreds and hundreds of years in the future. We're not going to get there anytime soon. But we are making steps all the time. And I really hope that people, that just the ordinary people, the riders, the instructors, the people in the industry, start taking the science on board and thinking,
Mm,
okay, right, how does this fit into my practice? How can I use this discovery to improve my practice? But unfortunately, there's so much dogma. And this goes a little bit off topic here, but forgive me for that.
no, fine. You're speaking straight from my heart. Just go ahead. You get an hour for this. This is so important.
There are many people, and I think this applies to all fields. They write a book or they make, and then that's down, it's their method. And then they're very reluctant to change that because it means admitting, whoops, we found something else. That what I said before isn't right. Now I need to go back and write that. But I've invested millions in putting out all these books and training programs and that sort of thing. So I don't really want to, I can't really go back and change it all now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the catch-22 you're in that you want to get a message out there and you want to help people improve their practices. But if you're tied into one particular dogma, it becomes very difficult then to change
Mm,
that. And of course, it takes time for the information to get out there. So, yes, it's a very difficult situation, very difficult mountain we have there to climb. But we've got our backpacks on, we've got the crampons on our feet, and we're going up there. We're going to get there eventually.
let's say with the picture, what is right now in the backpack? What studies are there to come?
Oh,
Can you give us a little preview?
um,
Something interested you
well,
have in the
my
pipeline?
my pet field is laterality.
Mhm.
So that's the different ways the two sides of the brain work in the horse, and the way that that manifests itself over the way it orientates itself and the way it behaves, particularly in stressful situations. I think there's a lot more we need to know about that. It seems at the moment that the left eye, so the right side of the brain, is dealing with stress reactions, but it also deals with social situations. So how does all that fit together? That is something that I would like to go into more depth with. I think there is a lot we need to learn about learning processes, and there's a lot we need to learn about when to back off the horse, when you've achieved something. And then really this comes down to training the people as well, is when is the horse reaching the point where it's got that point? Now just leave it to think about it for a bit. And it's usually an awful lot sooner than people think it is. This whole idea of, and this is kind of going into the practice more than the research, but it's finding the point where the horse is thinking that something might actually be its idea and stopping there and just letting it join the dots up. But again, that means accepting that the horse has much greater cognitive capacities than it is normally credited with. But I think if we can get to that, it would be even that is another step along the way. Put it that way. I did a course many years ago with quite a high-profile trainer in Switzerland, and I spent most of the course sitting on a block holding my horse, because his thing was, and he was right, and I use it now all the time, is when you've reached a point where in whatever you're trying to teach the horse, whether you're trying to teach it a sideways movement or you're teaching it about whatever you're trying, find the moment where it's trying to do the right thing and then wait. But don't just wait until it starts to chew. And that meant an awful lot of waiting sometimes. But oh boy, does it pay off. I mean, you might be sitting there for 15 minutes, but eventually it chews. And then the tension is leaving. And this is where the scientific part comes in, that when the horse starts to chew, it's releasing the jaw when it's tense. And this is when it's focused. It's not necessarily a bad tension. It's a tension when it's focused. It'll tend to get a little bit tight in the jaw and saliva collects in its mouth. So when it relaxes, it goes and swallows the saliva. And that's kind of the licking and chewing that we see. So it's a response after there's been, I think stress is too strong a word, but after there's been a bit of a challenge. So that actually, I knew already to stop when the horse was trying to do the right thing. I hadn't thought about giving it that extra time to wait. But since I started doing that, I found if you finish a session on one of those and you just go and sit on a block or sit on the fence and wait, then put the horse back, the next time you come out, it's going to do that thing so much faster. It's like something magic happens in the background while it's out in the field. Leave it for a couple of days even, and then come back to that same task, and it's going to be so much easier. And that works probably 95% of the time, unless the horse has serious concerns about what you're asking from it. That is going to make a massive difference. So, take a book out there with you and read that while you're waiting.
Yeah, stress makes stupid, right?
Exactly. But, finding those points where you're reaching the right moment to stop, that is something that actually does need, at the moment, I'm talking mostly out of practical experience. We do need more scientific backing for that. So that's something else that I would like to see developed further, along with many, many other things.
A friend of mine was lately saying, and sometimes it happens, she's working a lot also in research. They have been, she often says that at the end of the study, sometimes you have to be, prepared for overthrowing your own thesis. And that's a difficult part of it.
That happens so often in research. And in the team that I work in with Professor Krüger, it happens very, very often that we start off with one idea of what's likely to happen, and we set everything up around that, and we get it back and we look at the data and think, It's not showing that at all. It's showing something completely different.
Completely different. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I've just lately been joining a course with Tirza Hendricks, and she was talking about her dissections.
Mm.
She had this theory, or they had been working on the theory for many, many years, that there's the incomplete attachment of the nuchal ligament is something in our domestic horses exclusively, and then they dissected the zebra. Incomplete nuchal ligament. Ta-ta.
Oh. Oops,
Ta-ta.
back to the drawing board on that one.
Exactly. So that wasn't the point, obviously. But I just thought, I'm always getting goosebumps when people are talking about these moments, because I think, and that is maybe also the mindset that we need when we are going in there and say, don't go in there with a fixed framework, but say, interesting,
Yes.
interesting. And what is this explaining us?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think in your interactions with your horses as well, I mean, first of all, I must stress this, I can't stress this enough, safety always first. Don't put yourself or the horse at risk. But in a situation where you're exploring something new, be aware of what the horse is saying back to you. And judge your response to the horse on that basis. It's a two-way street.
Yes.
And this is what I find frustrating about a lot of training recommendations and methods, that it's all about the stimulus and response. And while it is right to a certain extent, there's a whole conversation that goes on in between that. And you need to start at a point, I think, where it's much more open, that you put an idea out to the horse and see what it does. And then if you need to persuade it into a particular direction, how do you guide that conversation? So you're not saying, horse, you've got to do this or I'm going to bash you. You're saying, okay, you didn't like that bit of it. Let's try coming at it this way. The end goal from our point of view is still the same, but we can be flexible in finding the way that is easiest for the horse to learn that without allowing the horse to take control of the situation, which is always the big risk. And then, of course, it can become dangerous. So you've got to fight, you've got to set your boundaries, but actually being much more sensitive to what comes back.
Now I'm asking you the question. I could continue talking with you forever, but somewhere we have to wrap that up. And now I'm asking you the question that I'm usually asking our guests at the end of the episode. And that is, if there's one wish that you could, send out to the equestrian world there that everybody should implement into their practice with horses, what would that be? Difficult one.
It is a difficult one. I mean, I think it's really what I was just saying. It's this awareness. Let the horse talk to you. Don't just talk to the horse. And people will say, oh, yes, I'm doing that. I'm doing that. But really trying to slow down a bit, open your mind, and just read what is coming back to you. People are very good at putting the pressure on. They're not so good at taking the pressure off. And the pressure is not necessarily physical pressure. It can also be mental pressure. So I think that it's giving the horse credit. Okay, let's phrase this another way. Is giving the horse credit for the intelligence that it actually has. And it's probably a lot more than you think it has, would be one thing. And another thing is, please read the science.
The science or the science?
The science. Please read. We're discovering all the time, because the goalposts are moving, and we're finding new things. As with the tool use, we find out something new. Oh, right, okay. Just as you were saying with the zebra, whoops, that changes everything a little bit. You need to be aware of these things, and it's kind of tough to do. And I think it also depends, of course, on your own level of experience with the horse. But I think if there's one single message, it's forgive your horse for being a horse, and try to understand it as a horse, because whatever the horse does makes sense from the horse's point of view.
That's a big one. Thank you very much, Kate, for today.
Thank you.
You have already lined up here a lot of topics I would love to dive into, so I hope I see you back here another time.
I'd love to. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
Pooh. quite something if we are considering what we have learned about the cognitive abilities of our equine friends already in this episode, but in general in the last years. Would like to share your thoughts with like-minded people, then you are welcome in our community. Welcome in the online academy. If you would like to share your thoughts there, we have a regular competence call where we can discuss that. The Academia Masterclass is close to starting its next round. Kate is also joining us as a lecturer there with her expertise on laterality. And you are welcome. I am starting to collect applications for this. If you would continue to deep dive, then I am recommending you the podcast episode about laterality that I have recorded together with Konstanze and Kate some months ago. I think it was last year in spring around this time. And I will also link you a few good books that I'm aware of about the equine mind. See you next week, and thank you for recommending us further.